Everybody, this is Patricia Windrow at the Cable Easel, bringing you a live program with answering telephone calls as one of the features and working on a scene that was shot today in Setauket. We work from an electronic technique which was developed right here. Instead of going outside, we bring the inside into the studio via a tape, which we shot today on this beautiful, clear, cloudless morning of an area, a historic church in Setauket known as the Caroline Church, the oldest Episcopal working church in the country. And it was named for Queen Caroline back in the early part of the 1700s. It's a rather beautiful piece of architecture. Very peculiar. It has a square tower, it has a conical top, and it also has bullet holes in the tower from the Revolutionary War. There was a little skirmish there on the square in Setauket between the British and the American rebels, and the church tower was used as a billeting place, and there are bullet holes in the square tower which is twisted by the wind and time. So if you have a chance to go and, wander around the area, do visit the Caroline Church. But today, it's a study in not just architecture, but also in colors. It's what I call a limited palette. And I'm going to be working in palette knife. Not to go with the word palette, but the palette knife is a wonderful technique, which is very convenient when you're working out of doors and racing against time and sunshine. Meaning that when you are out of doors and depending upon the elements, the sun tends to change things, and you have to make sure that you get as much as you can in a short space of time. If what I'm doing interests you, and if you have questions, please call me at 348-6800, and I'll answer the phones, like many other well-known talk show hosts. So I have here my, what I call thinned turpentine. I make it into the consistency of ink with a little bit of burnt umber, and I'm going to start laying it out. You must draw before you paint, contrary to an awful lot of instructional programs on the air whereby you just jump in there and start painting the sky. Well, that's not the way I work, because I'm a realist. And I'm going to place this particular structure as the first thing that I do to place it on the canvas. You have to know, and I assume that you know how to draw if you are going to attempt to paint. If you do not draw, then it would seem to me that practice in drawing would be the best solution for the beginning, and to paint later when you've learned how to lay things out. One of the reasons that I show you how to lay things out is to give you some kind of an idea of where you begin. A lot of people know how to begin, and therefore they might just be entertained to see what I do. However, proportion is an important thing, and you must use points of reference. I have been doing this an awfully long time, therefore I kind of know just about what size I should be working on for the canvas that I've chosen. It is not always the same with people who are just beginning. However, that's why I'm here, to answer the phone. If you have any questions about it, please call me, and we can turn it into a sort of a family conversation about art and painting and whatever may be on your mind at the moment. Everything but politics, please. And so, as I'm doing this, as you can see, it does require some laying out. It mustn't be done as if you are in an architectural class, but there has to be a certain understanding of proportion. Also, as you can see, I'm going to be drawing the shadow. Shadows are vital in any kind of painting. It gives a third-dimensional quality to the work. This is the shadow underneath the roof line. We'll get to that later, but it must be drawn in for proportion, because if you don't have this in, then the rest of the building is going to be too squat and too low. I am painting and drawing what I see. I'm not inventing anything. It is all exactly there in front of me. And so when I'm told by people who say I can't go out and paint from life, my constant advice and information is that it is easier to work from life than it is to grapple around in your memory and try to remember things when you've got it all there in front of you. So going out and working from life is something that I have been talking about now for, well, it's 15 years that I've been doing this cable easel program. It doesn't seem to be possible to be that long, but it is. Anyway, the details of all of the rest of it can come in later. It's the placement that I must get right now. And here, when you fall into the shadows, and I believe that you'll see that this building is beginning to take some form, you must also remember that shadows, as I said earlier, become the interesting part of a painting, and that's when you're looking for something, not only do you look for subject matter, but you also look for shadows. And the dramatic time of day, of course, is all part of it. This is the layout, this is the subject matter, this is what we're worried about. The rest of it is mere framing. In other words, this enormous pine tree that is very close to the building, my ink is running out, very close to the building can be laid out this way, but it's going against the sky. But here is the vertical that tree is going to take. There's another one right next to it, so that means there's a wonderful thing of two, and then even better, as Mozart would say, everything comes in threes. There's your third line. The diagonal of the fence, the bushes continue in the back here. The diagonal of the fence is practically horizontal, even though it seems to be receding. So I'm going to make it go off at an angle somewhat, because that's going to give you a third-dimensional quality. Now, this tombstone here is my landmark of where the corner goes. Points of reference, something that I tell people about, and which many people forget when they're going, and they don't know where they go, and they don't know where the drawing is progressing to, because they've forgotten about points of reference. Points of reference have to be used in order to know where to place things. This little side building here, I'm not quite sure what part of the church arrangement, but I think it's where the altar is back here. This church, the history of it is not unknown to me, but the details may not be entirely accurate. However, I do know that it was the church that had more money than the one that is across the street on this same village green in Setauket, which is the other church is the Presbyterian church. And this one is the one that had the money, named for the Queen Caroline, and the altar and the stained glass windows are quite remarkable. There is also there's a wonderful balcony which is called the slave choir loft, where the slaves at that time, and don't fool yourself, Long Island had slaves for a while, and then they were freed, but nevertheless there is a loft in this church where the slaves or the indigent worshippers were put. So here is the general layout. This is a diagonal that is going to give you another feeling of distance going off there, and it continues this way. So as long as we've got this much, all the details of the trees comes in later. And working with palette knife means exactly that. I'm working with this nice, shiny, clean palette knife, which means that your colors, more than likely, can never get muddy, because you will wipe this instrument clean every time you change a color. Now, I think that as I opened this thing, I said that this program, I said that the sky was absolutely cloudless today, which means that one wouldn't hesitate an instant to do a totally cloudless, blue, flat, almost a cardboard cutout sky. one of the pitfalls about palette knife painting is that many times smudging and nasty streaks take place. So my technique of palette knife painting is to keep the colors absolutely pure and to put them on without any streaks, meaning that I think that the sign of the amateur painter is when you let the streaks of the of flat areas become unreal. I'm a realist. Even though I'm working with something as interpretive as a knife, I still am paying attention to the realism of the subject matter and the realism of the colors. Now, most of the time, a sky, all skies, pretty much in every part of the world, appear to be darker at the top than they do towards the horizon. It is very rare that atmospheric conditions tell you that the horizon is darker than overhead. So, remembering that, this blue that I'm putting in up here, I'm going to just put it down to a certain point, and then I'm going to begin to cut it with white and probably a touch of orange probably, because that's how you subdue the brilliance of blue. And I think that if the monitor or if the television can pick up the subtlety, I'm going to lighten the lower part of this sky. I'm putting a little, just a touch of something called flesh tone. It's a kind of a smoky rose color. It is not going to appear rose on this sky, but it's just enough to subdue the blue from being too brilliant, and also it's the kind of atmosphere that is peculiar to Long Island. Long Island horizons are very characteristic of their own. They tend to have a mauvish kind of rosy tone towards the horizon. It's the flatness of the area and the fact that we are between two bodies of water that make the horizons, the color towards the horizons what they are. It may sound like a lot of double talk, but I have been painting this for an awfully long time. Now see, that monitor gives you an absolutely clear sky, a clear blue with no change in gradation. And if I find that if I do that, it isn't going to illustrate my point. Even though I'm working from life, I'm doing a little bit of interpreting right now because I want to talk about atmosphere. My programs are so short that I have to fit all kinds of things in a very short 1-hour program. And of course, when I've got the telephone to answer, the program becomes almost even shorter than that because some time is spent talking. 348-6800 is the number if you want to chat with me. In the meantime, as you can see, if you compare my technique with the techniques that are on other art shows or instructional programs, the business of putting the sky in with wide brushes is just another technique which I have not adopted, and I feel that the deliberate style of putting paint on in very calculated strokes, be they brush or be they palette knife, that's all purely a matter of taste. Now, I believe that if it's not too subtle, you'll find that the sky has graded from a brighter blue to a less bright blue, and I'm going to use something that other painters use. This is a fan brush. It's going to get rid a little bit of the palette knife style, but it is going to smooth out, because the realism is what I'm after. It's going to smooth out and blend the sky from the top with the sky at the lower part of the picture. This is not necessary to do at all time, but as I say, I want to include as many techniques as possible in this short period of time. And you wouldn't require an entire hour to show you how to do this, so it's kind of an interjection. It's just a little bit of an aside, as Shakespeare would say. It's an aside. It's just a sort of a whisper, showing you that one can in fact smooth out the strokes of the knife. I'm a little bit concerned that I haven't got enough bright blue over here by the tower. So let me take you back again and show you how I can emphasize that and the reason for my doing this. The reason that I'm going to give this bright blue just as it's supposed to be is so that the white of the tower will be able to be seen. Otherwise, the paleness of the sky would have eliminated the contrast that I need to make that steeple as bright white as it should be. So I believe now that when I put that on, you'll see that the whiteness of the tower can be put on with a nice thick stroke, paying attention to the fact that I'm not doing an architectural rendering. I'm doing an impression of this entire scene. Remembering, of course, that straight lines ought to be straight, and architecturally it ought to be as correct as possible. So I've got here the white tower, the white square, strange, wonderful-looking tower of this church, with its very very individualistic balcony up here. And the sunny side of the building, of course, I'm doing in pure white. The grayness of the balcony around the top of the tower will be put in later. This is called background painting. Background ready to receive the details that will come on later. But we all have to it has to be prepared. So here is the preparation, because this is called layer painting. You put one layer on after the other. And when you're dealing with layers, there has to be a first layer. Hence the business of putting the white in first. I'm using a quick drying paint. With any luck at all, it will dry enough for me to be able to show you towards the end of the program how the dryness of the paint is going to benefit the introduction of details. Here is a tiny part of this building that is being captured by the sun, and there's just a little white area there, and another little one back here capturing another part of another little building that's sticking out. The fence, of course, is going to be done almost as a very last thing. This part of the little protruding part of the building is also bathed in sun, and you can see now, with the application of just 3 colors, namely the a little bit more here. Namely, I've got the blue, which has been graded a bit. I've got the gray of the canvas, which I prepared, and I have the white of the church. A very telling way to show you how color can compose with very little effort. Do you get 3 dimensions with just 3 colors? Here comes the 4th color in its own way. It is the shadow of the tower. You don't talk when you do this, because you have to make sure that you don't wiggle. And if you wiggle, then you haven't got the architecture right, and it's a nuisance to have to go back and correct it. Okay, this line was a little bit crooked. Now I'm going to straighten that out this way. As soon as I see this, now remember that the tower is slightly twisted from what I told you, and that's the characteristic of the church. By the way, this church is an historic landmark, having been put on the National Register of Historic Landmarks, and the twisting of the tower is one of the features of it. The bullet holes are, of course, rather glamorous, but it's the twisting of the tower which is interesting to me, because it has an architectural oddity. The whole tower, because this is a wooden church, has in fact gone, and almost a torque has taken place. Here is the darkness that comes in this little balcony up here, and you can see that these things can be done with a minimum of detail, because the palette knife does not require tremendous architectural details, but you must be somewhat faithful to the architecture, and also that if this is a building that has these rows of shingles, then they must be put in. Here's the shadow that I drew first, that is the shadow on the white. Now, because of the brilliance of the day, the shadows of the white were very dark and very intense. More than likely due to the atmospheric conditions today, namely that it was so extremely bright outside. Now, here are the sides of the building, and they can be put on almost flat, such as a postcard. As you can see from the subject matter, the flatness of the grays was intense today, as well as the brilliance of the whites. So that's one of the reasons that I picked this scene, and you can see, of course, that there's a lovely, simple quality to the color scheme of this particular picture, of this particular scene. In the summer, of course, this becomes very green, almost invisible, and the bushes in the front, which are boxwood, I believe they're almost 200-year-old boxwood, and quite remarkable. They do, in fact, become yellowish green, and the whole scene is very different than what it is at this time of year. Of course, in the snow, it's also a remarkable-looking building. Now, the roof, whether it can be seen clearly or not, has got a slightly mauve color to it with a touch of umber. So a little bit of white, some ultramarine. By the way, I wanted to talk about the use of Prussian blue, which is one of the palette colors that is used many times on some other programs, and the Prussian blue is a color to stay away from at all costs. It is absolutely deadly, and it never really does what you want it to do, and the only reason to use it is in shadows when you want something really very dark combined with alizarin crimson. That gets you some wonderful dark tones, but Prussian blue should hardly ever be used at all. So it's a slight tip from me, who is, I have nothing against Prussian blue, but I just don't think it's ever wise to use it. The roof can be treated very flat. And we're dealing in planes of color. And in a few moments, I'm going to start to count once again the amount of colors that we have. Even though my palette consists of 15 little puddles of color, I will probably wind up with what I call a monochromatic painting here with very limited numbers of colors. Well, first of all, because it's that time of year, and secondly, because I picked the scene for this reason, to talk about monochromatic palettes and the lack of color as opposed to a tremendous amount of color. Some of the signs of the amateur is when there's too much color, and people don't know why they don't like these pictures, but it's because the color is always either unreal, untrue, gaudy, garish, or too numerous. Most colors that we live with are quite limited. That's one of the reasons that I chose this scene. That's one of the reasons that I'm talking about it and trying to get through this painting in the space of an hour to be able to prove a point that a limited palette is not only quite beautiful, but it's also very interesting to work at. So with these colors, which I have now, you will see, and picking them up very carefully in numbers, we have pale blue, white, gray, and dark gray, and that's it. So there's 4. So we are dealing now with 4 colors, which is probably a little startling to everybody, including to me. I'm always surprised when I get as much as I get out of such a minimum amount of color. Okay, so as was mentioned before, because it's this time of year, there's almost no foliage out of any consequence, and so the background here I'm going to dismiss it almost with a kind of what I might call a non-color. This is the smokiest kind of mauvish, greenish, nothing color, which is all in the background and which hugs the church here and gives it its sharp outline. It does not have to be dark to give a sharp outline to the building. It also fades down to almost nothing. Well, that's a boo-boos, which I'll correct immediately. Let me get my other palette knife out and pull that away. See, the palette knife is a very cooperative instrument to use because the paint is put on so thick that you have the opportunity of correcting errors when they're made, such as you just saw. Now I'm feathering this non-color of the background of the trees in such a way because these are all just little branches at the top that haven't popped into bloom yet, but they are nevertheless there. So you minimize them, and this is part of what I call an impressionistic approach to a subject. I believe there's a phone call, so I will continue to work, but I'd be happy to answer the phone. Please, hello there, and tell me your name.
Yes, hi, this is Gary from Smithtown.
Yeah?
Actually, I live in Medford now. I've been watching you for several months here, and I'm quite impressed with not only your style of painting on canvases with brushes. In fact, a while back you did a piece on Maple Avenue with the lake there.
Right.
Yeah, I was also wondering, are your pieces available for sale?
Yes, they are. The trouble is that I'm not up in this area too often. I only come up once a month to do this program live, and so I tell you what you do, sir. Write to me here in care of the station.
Okay.
And then I will contact you and tell you when I'm going to be around. We can get together.
Oh, that would be terrific. The other thing I wanted to mention is that, I was also very, very impressed with the piece that you're doing right now.
Oh, good.
And I was wondering what technique this is called.
A palette knife.
It's just a palette knife.
This is called palette knife.
That's a palette knife painting.
Yes.
It's quite marvelous. I just wanted to commend you on it.
Oh, I'm so glad you like it. And these palette knives are lovely because, brushes are extremely expensive, and you can pick up a palette knife for $3.
Oh, I tell you, I'm going to try it because I've been painting now for several years.
Please do.
And I'm going to try this technique because I haven't done this yet.
Please do, and call me again.
I will. I'm really impressed with your work.
Thank you so much for calling.
Okay, dear.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Oh, good. Well, he's going to buy himself a knife, and suddenly the whole world is going to open its doors to him. He's going to find himself completely changed. His attitude will never be the same again. Let me just, for as long as I'm thinking about it, I'm going to pop in what appears to be a window right here, and all it needs is a slight suggestion. It does not need to be overdone. Here is a larger one. See, and working from life tells me exactly what I need to know, and I don't have to agonize over what do I remember and what do I not remember. These are the shadows underneath the shadowy side of the building. Now, I do not see any windows beyond that, but I do see this part of this little dark roof here. And there we go. And this is all just a question of pattern. And I believe that my friend that just called, I didn't hear his name, I wish I had, but he'll call me back and we'll get together again. That side building there is got some light hitting the roof, and we pay attention to that as well because that's all part of realism. As soon as you start to pay attention to light and shade, then you're into a very intriguing part of painting, which is realism. I hope that this will show. It's very subtle. The colors are very subtle, and sometimes the TV doesn't pick them up. Well, I'll just darken the part that's dark, and then that'll make my point of this insignificant shadow that turns out to be very important for the three-dimensional quality that only shadows can give you. There you go. Now, I do believe that will tell you that there's a shadow on that building. Not that obvious, but obvious enough to make it mysterious. All right, and we have here another window back there. So all of these things are little details which have to be attended to. Okay, I'm going to put in I've got to keep keep this knife and put my window in here, and it's an eyebrow window, meaning that it's rounded at the top, and if you can possibly, with such a loose technique, designate the fact that it is an eyebrow window, you will not only have the anatomy of this church correct, but you'll also have the architecture correct. Something which I'm really kind of a bug about. Make it correct. Be a reporter almost. And when I paint in Italy or France, and I want to make sure that when I come back and the paintings that I have, people will say, oh, I know where that place is because I recognize so-and-so. So it means that the accuracy is important. I'm going to carry on. I just thought of this up here. I want to point up this tower a bit and put the top of that building on, which is first the shadow, and then I'll put the shiny thing on. And so let me put that on right now. There's that big gold ball up there, and it's very characteristic of this particular church. It also has a little round knob on the balcony up here, and a little knob there. The knob in the background, of course, is there too, but it's in shadow, so it's darker. Little details, little nasty things that you have to do. in order to be called a realist. I believe there's a shadow that runs underneath this little parapet here. Okay, so yeah, isn't that a lovely tower? Isn't that absolutely wonderful? And those are of course all shingles up there, because this is a wooden church, and the little shingles can be shown only with just the slightest suggestion. I'm going to, I've now done what you call preparing for the details. We're working from back to front, meaning that the part that's the farthest away is the part that you do first. Now, because I'm going to be working with some greens, I'm going to mix yellow ochre and cerulean blue, which will make a kind of a subdued green for the tops of the bushes. Only the tops, because this is a dark time of year, and the light is only caressing the tops of these marvelous 200-year-old boxwood trees, some of which are bushes rather have now obliterated the site of the windows. Something that is also characteristic of this church, that it is engulfed with these remarkable old boxwoods. Do go and see this building if you can ever fit it into some of your tours of the area. Long Island is rich beyond description of historic places such as this, tucked away in little quiet corners, but they are on the National Register of Landmarks, and I believe that the church is open at all times for you to really stand in awe and wonder that this church has stood for so long. It's a wooden church after all. You know, I mean, stone churches don't catch on fire, but wooden churches do catch on fire, and this one has remained standing for all these years. Now you can notice that I'm going past the guideline of the picket fence, because I'm going to be putting the picket fence over, in my layer technique, over the bushes. The bushes are growing behind the fence, therefore you will, in fact, put the bushes in so that you can prepare for the pickets later. I'm sure that the fellow who just called me knew this if he's been painting with a brush, but one must also remember that the same thing applies when you're painting with this, except that even more so. So the interpretation of these bushes is what I'm after, not the fact that there are maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, but the general pattern of this green that is growing in front of these buildings. There's a little one sort of nodding its way over here in the distance with not much attention being paid to it. These are lovely grounds, and by the way, sometime, another little small piece of information, this Caroline Church Fair is quite an event, and some of the loveliest pieces you can imagine comes out of the attics of the parishioners of this church. And every year on the green, watch for it in the papers, the Caroline Church Fair is very, very successful and very popular, and it's been going on for a long time. I have been going to the Caroline Church Fair probably for 30 years. So it's a good way of seeing the church, and also to be able to participate in the acquisition of some wonderful forgotten antiques and things. I'm using a very dark green here because of the need to prepare for the fence. So this is just about all one would need to do to get, well, the fence, the bushes are all still behind this fence all the way down, so I best put them all the way down. There is, however, some lawn back there, but none of it is visible, so I'm going to paint what I see and not invent anything. However, I do know that there is grass. There's a grassy area just below those tombstones, and let's put those in because I have walked through the grounds very often, and this is a kind of a, well, it's not exactly a bright green, but it's a different green from the bushes, and I'll replace the drawing of the picket fence in just a moment, but I must put my tombstones in first. And so you can see now time to count colors. I do believe that we must start to see what's happening with these colors. We've got pale blue And white is 2, and gray is 3, dark gray is 4, this nothing color in the background is 5, dark green is 6, and the light green is 7, and the light green could probably be counted the same as for the grassy area. So we have 7 colors as a total color scheme for this monochromatic study, architectural study, as well as a study in color and focus. Now, I'm going to be able to combine, as I say, I want to try and touch as many possibilities with this subject as I can of technique. And so while I'm doing that, I'm going to break for just a moment and come back. So don't untune me, just wait a moment, we'll be right back.